For Morty Smith, knowledge doesn't arrive as a gift. It comes as corrosion, slow, invisible, and inevitable. From the moment he begins traveling with Rick, the boundaries that once defined his world start to dissolve. The comforting rules of morality, safety, and consequence are replaced by something colder, stranger, and more vast. The universe, he learns, is infinite, not just in space, but in indifference. And within that infinity, the human heart becomes a fragile, flickering thing, desperate to make meaning where none exists. Morty begins his journey as a boy who believes in the order of things, but as he grows, he becomes a witness to the truth that order is only an illusion we invent to survive. The first thing knowledge takes from him is simplicity. Once, wrong and right felt like separate roads. Now they blur together in Rick's shadow. Every adventure starts with the same lie, that it's just another fun trip, another meaningless errand. But somewhere between galaxies, between screams and jokes, something shifts. Morty starts noticing the cost, the broken worlds left behind, the faces that don't get remembered, the quiet moments after survival where the laughter sounds hollow. Rick calls it science. Morty calls it Tuesday. And in that repetition, the shape of innocence erodes. He doesn't lose his empathy all at once. It disappears in fragments through decisions that feel small at the time. A promise not kept, a creature ignored, a death rationalized as necessary. Rick teaches him that morality is a social construct, but Morty can't stop feeling. Every cruel lesson leaves a bruise. Every detached explanation. Another layer of numbness trying to cover something that refuses to die inside him. Conscience. The cruel irony is that Morty learns faster than anyone realizes. He becomes aware not just of how the universe works, but of how people use that knowledge to excuse cruelty. And the more aware he becomes, the lonelier it feels. Awareness, for Morty, is not enlightenment, it's exposure. The universe doesn't become clearer, it becomes unbearable. Each new horror strips away another illusion, that love protects, that fairness exists, that the good guys always win. Rick's brilliance burns through every comforting lie. But in the ashes, Morty finds something that even Rick can't see. The quiet truth that even in meaninglessness, compassion still matters. If nothing has intrinsic value, then kindness is the only rebellion left. It's the only thing that creates value out of nothing. But that realization doesn't make him peaceful. It makes him weary. Because trying to stay kind in an uncaring universe is exhausting. It's like holding your breath underwater while someone tells you that air is an illusion. Every time Morty reaches for decency, reality smirks and punishes him for it. He learns that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee safety, it often guarantees suffering, yet he keeps trying. Because even if kindness doesn't save him, it keeps him from disappearing into the same void that consumed Rick. It keeps him human. The tragedy of Morty isn't that he becomes like Rick. It's that he becomes aware enough to understand Rick, but still too emotional to live like him. He sees both sides, the cold clarity of nihilism and the aching pull of empathy, and he can't commit fully to either. He knows too much to believe in simple hope, but he feels too much to surrender to total despair. That tension defines him. It's what makes him break down, lash out, withdraw, and then try again. He isn't built for detachment, no matter how much the universe insists on it. His softness is a scar that never heals. There's a moment that defines his philosophy, not an action, but a silence. After another chaotic ordeal, after another death that no one will remember, he stops trying to explain his feelings. He just looks at Rick, at the stars, and says nothing. That silence holds everything he's learned, that talking won't fix it, that meaning won't return, that awareness doesn't undo grief. It's not cynicism, it's surrender, not to despair, but to reality. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is stop pretending you're okay. But knowledge doesn't just change how Morty sees the universe, it changes how he sees himself. He starts questioning his own motives, the small ways he's learned to justify harm, the moments he's looked away when it was easier. Rick's influence doesn't erase Morty's morality, it distorts it. He starts to realize that even morality can become selfish, that even compassion can become a way to protect yourself from guilt. That realization hurts more than anything, because it means he's not the innocent one anymore. It means he's part of the same machinery he used to hate. And yet, that's where the first glimmer of maturity appears. True morality, Morty learns, isn't about being pure. It's about being conscious of your flaws and still choosing to care. Awareness without compassion turns you into Rick. Compassion without awareness turns you into a victim. The balance between them is fragile, and Morty spends his life learning how to walk that line. He'll never master it, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to keep trying, even when you know trying won't change anything cosmic. As he grows, Morty begins to notice how the universe mirrors him. Every planet, every society, every version of himself, all of them caught in the same loops of fear and longing. He starts to see existence not as a story with meaning, but as a pattern, endless, repetitive, self-correcting. Rick laughs at that realization, but Morty feels something holy in it. If everything is repeating, then every act of kindness is also repeating. Every act of love, every moment of hope. Maybe meaning doesn't need to be permanent to matter. Maybe it just needs to exist, even once, even briefly, to make the infinite less cruel. The cost of knowing is heavy, and Morty feels it in every part of his life. In his relationships, his sleepless nights, his inability to feel joy without guilt. He carries the weight of awareness quietly. Rick buries it in alcohol and science. Morty buries it in silence. But beneath the numbness, there's a pulse, the stubborn, irrational belief that even if the universe doesn't care, people still can. That even if nothing matters, caring still feels right. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the point isn't to find truth, but to live kindly inside the chaos. Maybe awareness isn't a destination, but a wound you learn to live with. Morty will never stop seeing the darkness, but he'll also never stop searching for light within it. That's what separates him from Rick. That's what makes his pain meaningful, not because it leads to answers, but because it proves he hasn't given up on feeling. Knowledge changes him, yes. It strips him of innocence, of comfort, of certainty. But it also gives him clarity, the kind that hurts, but heals. It teaches him that empathy is a choice you make even when logic tells you not to. That caring is an act of defiance, not naivety. The universe might be meaningless, but Morty refuses to be. And in that refusal, he becomes something extraordinary. A reminder that awareness and compassion don't have to cancel each other out. They can coexist, quietly, in the same trembling heart. When he finally looks at the stars again, they don't frighten him anymore. They still stretch endlessly, still burn indifferently, but he sees something new in them, not purpose, but participation. He's part of it all. The chaos, the pain, the beauty. Knowledge cost him everything that made life easy, but it gave him something harder, rarer, more sacred. The ability to stay kind, even after he understood how cruel the universe could be. And that, he realizes, is the real miracle of knowing not. That it makes you wiser, but that it doesn't destroy you completely. Morty never chose to become who he is. He was pulled into it. Influence is the first force that shapes him, stronger than gravity, subtler than fear. Rick doesn't just teach him about science or space. He teaches him how to see the world in fragments. Every adventure rewires a small part of Morty's brain, bending him toward cynicism, toward survival, toward the kind of thinking that values efficiency over empathy. It's not deliberate cruelty, it's simply how Rick exists. But for someone like Morty, who feels everything, that influence is radioactive. It seeps into him slowly, leaving him glowing with contradictions. At first, Morty idolizes Rick. There's a strange comfort in his grandfather's certainty. Rick seems to know everything, to command reality itself. And for a boy lost in the confusion of adolescence, that kind of control feels like salvation. Morty follows him through portals and planets, mistaking proximity for power. But the more he sees, the more he understands that Rick's certainty isn't confidence, it's armor. Every sarcastic quip, every act of indifference is a wall against the unbearable awareness that intelligence can't save you from meaninglessness. Rick's genius is his defense mechanism, and Morty is caught in its orbit. Influence begins as fascination and ends as inheritance. Without realizing it, Morty starts to copy Rick's mannerisms, the detached tone, the dark humor, the way he rationalizes pain. He laughs at things that would have horrified him a year earlier. He dismisses fear with sarcasm. But every imitation leaves a residue of guilt. He knows he's losing something, but he can't name what it is. Rick calls it growing up. Morty calls it decay. He starts noticing how Rick's worldview infects everything around him. When you live with someone who believes nothing matters, it's impossible not to absorb the echo of that belief. It seeps into your relationships, your empathy, your sleep. Morty begins to realize that nihilism isn't just a philosophy, it's a contagion. You don't adopt it, you catch it. And once it's inside you, it doesn't shout, it whispers. It tells you that your pain doesn't matter, that your joy is temporary, that caring makes you foolish. For a while, Morty resists. He still tries to care. He still wants to believe that his choices matter. But every time he reaches for goodness, reality punishes him for it. The universe keeps proving Rick right. The cruel live longer, the kind suffer quietly. Morality feels like a game rigged against those who play sincerely. He watches Rick navigate this truth with reckless ease, and part of him envies it. How simple it must be to stop caring, how quiet, how free. But Morty isn't built that way. Every time he tries to emulate Rick's detachment, something inside him aches. A quiet rebellion he can't explain. Influence, Morty realizes, isn't just what someone teaches you, it's what they make you. Question. Rick doesn't convince Morty to stop caring. He forces Morty to define why he still does. Every cruel lesson becomes a mirror. Every act of manipulation becomes a test of identity. Who are you when the person you look up to tells you that goodness is delusion? Who are you when logic and empathy never agree? Those questions become Morty's education, not the kind Rick intended, but the kind that shapes a soul. He learns to see Rick differently, not as a god, but as a man terrified of his own intelligence. A man who stares into infinity and finds only reflection. Morty stops trying to be like him and starts feeling sorry for him. That's when influence starts to reverse its direction. For the first time, Morty realizes that compassion can move upward, that maybe, in some small way, Rick needs him. Not as a sidekick or moral foil, but as proof that something human can survive even in the presence of genius. Still, the damage is done. There are nights when Morty catches himself thinking like Rick, talking like Rick, justifying like Rick, and it scares him. Influence doesn't disappear when you reject it. It lingers in your reflexes. He'll spend years unlearning the ease of cynicism, the comfort of apathy. It's a slow detox from a poison disguised as wisdom. And every time he slips back into it, he feels the weight of how deep it runs. Rick once said you can't go home again after seeing the truth. Morty believes it, but maybe you can build a new home out of what you've learned. Smaller, quieter, but real. He begins to notice how influence works in the opposite direction too. Despite all his walls, Rick starts to change because of Morty. He hesitates before certain decisions, softens during moments of silence. He never admits it, but Morty sees it, the small cracks in his grandfather's armor. It's not redemption, it's recognition. Influence isn't one way, it's an exchange. Even in pain, people shape each other. Even in despair, empathy seeps through. Morty's relationship with influence becomes his philosophy. He stops pretending he's untouched by Rick's worldview, but he refuses to let it define him. He understands now that you can't escape the people who shaped you, but you can decide what parts of them you carry forward. He doesn't want to become Rick, but he doesn't hate him either. He sees him as part of the equation, the necessary counterbalance that taught him where his own boundaries lie. Influence doesn't destroy identity, it reveals it. The hardest part of growing up under someone like Rick is realizing that even if you reject their beliefs, they've already changed the lens through which you see the world. Morty can never go back to the simple morality of childhood. But that doesn't mean he's doomed to repeat Rick's mistakes. It means he has to learn a different kind of strength, the strength to care despite influence, not in ignorance of it. As he matures, Morty's compassion becomes less emotional and more deliberate. He stops being kind because it feels right, and starts being kind because it's the only thing left that makes sense. Influence may have stripped away his innocence, but it left him with a choice to perpetuate the detachment that shaped him, or to soften it into something survivable. He chooses softness, not because it's logical, but because it's necessary. Influence never ends, it just changes form. Rick gave Morty knowledge that fractured him, but that fracture let empathy seep into the cracks. Every broken piece of his worldview becomes a window instead of a wound. Through it, he sees the universe, vast, absurd, uncaring, and chooses to care anyway. That's his rebellion. That's his inheritance. When Morty looks at Rick now, he no longer sees a teacher. He sees a warning, and maybe, beneath all the noise, a mirror. Influence, after all, is just gravity between souls. You can't escape it. You can only decide how to move within its pull. Guilt follows Morty like a shadow he can't outrun. It doesn't scream, it doesn't punish, it just lingers, quiet, steady, waiting. Every world he's seen, every choice he's made under pressure, every silence when he should have spoken, all of it collects in him. It's not the kind of guilt that comes from breaking rules. It's the kind that comes from breaking yourself. Rick tells him it's useless, that guilt is an evolutionary defect, a glitch left over from when people believed the universe cared. But Morty can't shake it, because for all of Rick's explanations, guilt feels real. It's proof that some part of him still remembers what decency is supposed to feel like. At first, guilt looks like fear. The tremor in his voice after another adventure. The sleepless nights when laughter echoes back as accusation. But it evolves. It becomes part of his thinking, the invisible filter through which he views everything. Every new decision is haunted by the memory of a worse one, Every moment of happiness feels temporary, undeserved. He tells himself that regret is weakness, that he should learn from it and move on. But moving on starts to feel like betrayal. How do you forgive yourself when the universe keeps showing you the weight of your actions, multiplied across infinite versions of yourself? In a multiverse where every choice has already been made, guilt becomes infinite too. There's no closure, no redemption, because there's always another version of you that didn't make it right. Somewhere, a Morty chose wrong. Somewhere, he caused more pain. Somewhere, he's still watching it happen. That realization fractures him in ways even Rick can't quantify. It's not the science that breaks him. It's the empathy stretched across dimensions. Guilt becomes not just emotional, but existential. If everything that can happen does happen, then so does every mistake. How do you live with that? Rick's answer is to stop trying, to drown. Guilt in knowledge, in chaos, in distraction. Morty tries that for a while. It doesn't work. No matter how far he runs, guilt follows. It sits with him in silence, waiting for the noise to stop. He realizes that you can't unlearn empathy. Once you've cared deeply, even once, every cruelty becomes unbearable. Every indifference feels like a wound. Guilt, he discovers, isn't the opposite of detachment. It's what happens when detachment fails. It's the echo of caring in a world that doesn't reward it. There's a part of Morty that resents Rick for teaching him too much. Knowledge without compassion is poison, and Rick poured it into him under the guise of freedom. But another part of Morty knows that guilt is also what keeps him from becoming like Rick. It's the reminder that he still feels, that he hasn't fully surrendered. The weight hurts, but it's also proof of life. The day the guilt disappears completely, he knows, will be the day he's lost something irreplaceable. He begins to treat guilt differently, not as punishment, but as teacher. It shows him where his values still live, where his boundaries are. It humbles him, keeps him cautious, makes him listen. He starts apologizing more, not because it fixes anything, but because he's learned that acknowledgement is the only real repair available in a world without guarantees. When he says, "I'm sorry now," it's not a plea for forgiveness. It's a way of saying, I still care about what I've done, even if the universe doesn't. But guilt also isolates. It convinces him that he's unworthy of peace, that happiness would be dishonest. Rick calls it sentimentality, but it's more than that. It's loyalty to the people he couldn't save, to the mistakes that shaped him. Sometimes, Morty wonders if he clings to guilt because letting go would mean forgetting. And forgetting feels like the one sin he can't commit. In a universe that erases meaning at every turn, memory is sacred, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. The hardest kind of guilt is the one that doesn't come from action, but from survival. The times he lived when others didn't. The random mercy of chance. The guilt of being the version of Morty who made it through while others didn't. He carries that quietly, a private grief disguised as endurance. Rick calls it unnecessary. But for Morty, it's what makes life precious. The randomness of existence doesn't make him careless. It makes him reverent. Every breath feels borrowed. Every moment feels like something he owes the ones who didn't get another. He starts to understand that guilt can't be erased. It can only be integrated. It becomes part of his philosophy, part of the way he relates to the world. He stops trying to cleanse it and starts learning to coexist with it. Like a scar, it stops hurting all the time, but it never stops reminding. When he looks back at the versions of himself, he can remember the never stops, reckless one, the naive one, the broken one. He doesn't flinch anymore. He feels compassion for them. They didn't know better. They were learning, just like he still is. That, too, is a kind of forgiveness. Rick once told him that guilt is useless because it doesn't change anything. But Morty realizes that's exactly what makes it powerful. Change isn't the point. Awareness is. Guilt forces you to stay awake in a world that begs you to fall asleep. It keeps you honest when knowledge tempts you toward arrogance. It's not comfortable, but it's real. And in a universe built on simulation and detachment, reality, however painful, is sacred. Eventually, Morty begins to see guilt not as something to escape, but as something to balance. Too little, and you become reckless. Too much, and you freeze. The trick is to let it move through you like weather, acknowledge it, feel it, and then let it pass. He knows he'll never be free of it completely, but maybe that's okay. Maybe guilt isn't meant to be erased, but softened. Maybe it's what roots you in empathy when everything else drifts away. And, in the quiet moments, when the weight feels unbearable, he remembers what he's learned. Guilt isn't the punishment for caring, it's the evidence of it. It means you tried. It means you still believe you can do better. It means, in the middle of a universe that doesn't care, you still do. That realization doesn't make the guilt disappear, but it makes it bearable. It transforms it from burden into compass. Every time he feels it, he knows he's still capable of conscience. Every time it hurts, it's proof he hasn't gone numb. And in a world where numbness is easy, that hurt becomes something sacred. So Morty keeps walking, carrying the guilt with him, not as chains, but as reminder. A quiet pulse of awareness that says, "You're still human, don't forget." At some point, Morty stops feeling things in the way he used to. Not all at once, it's gradual, like colour fading from a photograph. He doesn't notice when it begins. One day he just realizes that he's watching something horrible happen and not flinching. He's listening to someone cry and not knowing what to say. He's laughing at things that aren't funny because it's easier than trying to react the right way. It's not that he doesn't care, it's that he's exhausted by caring. The architecture of numbness is built out of survival. And Morty, after everything, needs to survive himself. The numbness doesn't feel like emptiness at first. It feels like rest. After years of being overwhelmed by guilt, fear, and awareness, the quiet feels merciful. He tells himself it's growth, that he's finally learned to stop letting everything hurt so much. Rick even congratulates him for it, calling it maturity. But deep down, Morty knows it's something else, not peace, but distance. A thin wall between him and the world. A way to live without feeling like you're constantly breaking. It's easy to mistake numbness for wisdom. It makes you sound calm, look composed, act rational. But underneath, it's rot disguised as control. Morty becomes skilled at appearing fine, at pretending that chaos doesn't shake him anymore. He mirrors Rick's detachment so well that it starts to scare him. He begins to understand how easy it is to disappear behind irony, how quickly sarcasm becomes armor. Every joke becomes a form of self-preservation. Every shrug a quiet admission of pain. There are days when he tries to feel again, when he forces himself to care about something small, like fixing something that doesn't matter, or helping someone who won't remember it. But the spark doesn't always come. The numbness has rules now. It allows enough feeling to function, but not enough to risk breaking. He's become a curator of emotion, letting in only what won't flood him. It's efficient, but it's lonely. Rick calls emotion a distraction from progress. Morty starts to see how dangerous that idea really is. Because once you stop feeling, you stop connecting. Once you stop connecting, everything becomes abstract, pain, love, life itself. You start treating people like variables, moments like data. That's how Rick lives. and it's how Morty starts to. The realization makes him sick. He doesn't want to be that way, but he also doesn't know how to go back. Once you've seen how fragile emotions are in an indifferent universe, it's hard to trust them again. The architecture of numbness becomes self-sustaining. Each suppressed reaction reinforces the illusion of control. Each detached thought convinces him he's safe. But safety built on disconnection isn't safety, it's stagnation. Morty begins to notice how quiet his inner world has become. The parts of him that used to argue, to question, to dream, have all gone. Still, he doesn't feel anger or grief anymore. He just feels tired. And in that exhaustion, he begins to understand something Rick never will. That numbness doesn't protect you from pain, it protects you from healing. There's a night when Morty dreams of something simple, his family, together, laughing over nothing. When he wakes, it hurts in a way he almost forgot was possible. The ache feels like electricity through a body that had gone cold. It's unbearable, but it's alive. He realizes then that pain is proof of connection. To stop feeling pain completely would mean cutting himself off from everything he loves. The numbness, for all its stability, is a kind of death. He starts to look for small cracks in the walls he's built, moments where emotion still leaks through, a song that reminds him of something pure, a smell that brings back a memory, the quiet vulnerability of someone trusting him with their fear. These fragments become his map back to feeling. He doesn't rush it. He just observes. He learns that emotions don't disappear when you suppress them. They go underground, waiting for your permission to return. But returning isn't easy. When the feelings come back, they come back sharp. Everything he'd avoided hits at once. The sorrow, the anger, the love. It's too much, too fast. He breaks down in ways he didn't think he could anymore. Rick calls it regression, but Morty knows it's resurrection. Feeling again means remembering who he was before cynicism. It means re-entering the pain, yes, but also the beauty. Because the same sensitivity that makes him hurt is what allows him to see wonder again. He begins to understand that numbness isn't the opposite of emotion. It's the pause between grief and grace. It's what the mind builds when it's overwhelmed by too much truth. And maybe it's necessary sometimes. Maybe shutting down is how you survive when the world refuses to make sense. The danger isn't in going numb, it's in mistaking that numbness for peace. So Morty learns to let the numbness exist without worshipping it. He doesn't try to destroy it or glorify it. He treats it like a bruise, a tender reminder of where he's been hurt and where he's healing. He allows himself to feel nothing when it's too heavy, but he doesn't let that nothingness define him. Slowly, he relearns the language of feeling, not as chaos, but as connection. He begins to notice how small moments bring warmth back into him, the way someone looks at him and means it, the quiet sound of laughter shared with no audience, the stillness after a storm. He learns to sit in those moments, not analyzing them, not protecting himself from them, just letting them exist. The numbness doesn't vanish, but it thins. Beneath it, emotion moves again, slow and fragile, like thawing ice. By the time Morty recognizes what's happening, he's no longer afraid of feeling too much. He's afraid of feeling nothing again. Because numbness, he realizes, isn't peace, it's pause. And peace, real peace, requires motion. It requires participation. It requires being touched by life, even when it hurts. He will always carry the architecture of numbness inside him, the walls he built to survive. But he's learned where the doors are now. He knows when to step out, when to breathe, when to let the sunlight in. He can't unlearn detachment, but he can choose when to use it. He can decide not to live behind it. And in that choice, small, quiet, deliberate, Morty rediscovers something Rick never could. That feeling, even when it hurts, is what makes the universe bearable. It's what gives all the meaningless noise its fragile, beautiful rhythm. So he lets the numbness stay, but only as shadow, never as shelter. There comes a point when Morty realizes that detachment isn't strength, it's surrender. That numbness isn't protection, it's paralysis. And that if the universe truly is indifferent, then finding meaning within it isn't naive, it's defiance. This realization doesn't arrive like revelation. It sneaks in, quiet and exhausted, after years of despair. Because once you've seen everything stripped of purpose, once you've lived long enough inside nihilism, you start to understand that meaning isn't something waiting to be discovered. It's something you have to build, out of scraps, out of faith, out of sheer stubbornness. For Morty, meaning begins where logic ends. The universe doesn't reward goodness, but he chooses to be good anyway. It doesn't honor loyalty, but he stays loyal. It doesn't care if he feels, but he lets himself feel. Each small act becomes an act of rebellion against the vast emptiness that Rick calls truth. Meaning, he learns, is a form of protest. You don't find it, you make it, and in making it you declare, I exist, and I will care anyway. At first, this rebellion feels fragile, almost childish. It's easier to hide behind Rick's cynicism than to risk being sincere in a world that punishes sincerity. But Morty has seen where that cynicism leads, to isolation, to bitterness, to an endless loop of knowing everything and feeling nothing. He doesn't want that anymore. So he begins quietly, reclaiming the smallest pieces of meaning, helping without reason, caring without reward, choosing kindness even when it hurts. Each choice feels like lighting a candle in a universe that insists on darkness. Rick mocks him for it, calls it sentimentality, delusion, weakness. Morty doesn't argue anymore. He just listens, nods, and continues. Because he understands something Rick never will. That even if everything ends in entropy, not everything deserves to be treated as if it's already dead. Meaning doesn't need to be eternal to matter. It just needs to exist long enough to change the shape of one moment, to soften the edge of something cruel, to remind someone that warmth is still possible. He starts noticing meaning in the ordinary again, in the small acts that once felt invisible, a smile that isn't forced, the way someone says your name softly, the silence after an apology. Meaning isn't cosmic, it's personal. It doesn't live in stars or equations. It lives in the quiet exchanges between fragile beings who know they'll lose everything and love anyway. That, he decides, is the only kind of meaning that can survive awareness. There's a moment when Morty finally stops trying to argue with Rick's philosophy. He realizes that nihilism isn't something you defeat, it's something you outgrow. It's a phase of understanding, not an endpoint. Once you've accepted that life has no inherent meaning, you're free to create your own, without fear of contradiction. He starts treating, meaning the way Rick treats science, as a process. An experiment in empathy, a way of testing how much light you can make from nothing. Meaning becomes a practice, not a principle. Morty starts small, fixing things he doesn't have to, comforting people who won't remember it, noticing beauty without trying to capture it. These moments don't add up to anything grand. They don't erase pain or change fate, but they make the air feel lighter. They make existing feel less mechanical. Meaning doesn't make life easier, it makes it bearable. And for Morty, that's enough. He begins to understand that rebellion doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't need to destroy systems or rewrite rules. The truest rebellion is persistence, the refusal to stop caring in a universe that keeps proving why you shouldn't. Every small act of love becomes a quiet revolution. Every honest feeling becomes resistance. To be kind in the face of absurdity is to declare war on despair. Rick doesn't. Understand why Morty hasn't collapsed under the same weight of awareness. How he can know everything and still care. But Morty has learned that knowledge and compassion aren't opposites, they're siblings. Awareness gives shape to care. Without it, kindness is blind. With it, kindness becomes deliberate. It becomes choice, not reflex. And that makes it stronger. Over time, this rebellion transforms Morty's relationship with pain. He no longer sees suffering as proof that life is meaningless. He sees it as proof that he's still connected to something real. Pain doesn't contradict meaning, it deepens it. Every heartbreak, every failure, every loss, they all add texture to his understanding. They don't define him, but they shape him into someone who can hold both joy and grief without collapsing. He starts noticing that the universe isn't entirely indifferent after all. Not because it cares, but because it reflects. When you love, the world gives love form. When you laugh, it carries the sound forward. When you choose kindness, it reverberates, quietly, endlessly, through people and places you'll never know. Meaning doesn't come from the universe giving you answers. It comes from the fact that your questions leave echoes. The rebellion of meaning doesn't make Morty happier, but it makes him steadier. It gives him a reason to wake up, even when everything feels pointless. Because maybe the point isn't to be happy. Maybe it's to be honest, to live truthfully in a dishonest universe, to feel deeply in a shallow one. Meaning, for Morty, becomes synonymous with presence. It's not about escaping the absurd, it's about inhabiting it fully. There's a moment when he and Rick are standing on the edge of another destroyed world. Rick says something dismissive, a joke about the futility of existence. Morty doesn't answer. He just looks at the stars, then at the ruins, and feels something strange, not despair, not hope, but acceptance. The kind that doesn't need an argument, the kind that says, yes, it's all meaningless, and I'm still here. That's the rebellion. Not fighting the void, but refusing to let it define you. Not defeating the absurd, but dancing inside it. Not finding meaning once and for all, but creating it again and again, even after it breaks. Because meaning isn't permanent, it's practice. And practice, Morty learns, is the purest form of faith. When he finally lies down to rest after another long, absurd, beautiful day, Morty doesn't need to justify anything anymore. He doesn't need the universe to make sense. He's found something better. The quiet conviction that meaning, even when self-made, is real. Because it's felt, because it's chosen, because it endures in defiance of everything that says it shouldn't. And in that defiance, Morty feels something close to peace. Not because the universe cares, but because he does. Responsibility is a strange inheritance for Morty. It doesn't come from maturity or morality or even choice. It comes from exposure. Once you've seen the scale of consequence, once you've held the knowledge that every decision ripples through infinite realities, you can't pretend ignorance anymore. And for Morty, who's always cared too much, that knowledge becomes a quiet burden he carries through every breath. He's learned what Rick has always known, that every action has a cost. But, unlike Rick, he can't stop counting. At first, responsibility feels like guilt's echo, another form of punishment, the same voice whispering, "You could have done more." But over time, it becomes something else. It becomes awareness. Not the kind that paralyzes, the kind that humbles. He starts to see responsibility not as control, but as stewardship. You can't fix everything. You can't undo the damage you've seen. But you can take care of what's in front of you. You can leave one corner of the chaos slightly softer than you found it. Morty learns this slowly, painfully. There's no single moment of awakening, no clean revelation. Responsibility arrives like rain, constant, subtle, reshaping everything over time. He begins to take care in small ways. The way he speaks to others, the way he helps without needing acknowledgement. The universe still doesn't care, but he does, and that becomes enough of a reason. In a world where every version of him could fail, the act of choosing decency feels monumental. It's a small rebellion against the entropy of indifference. He starts to understand that responsibility isn't about control, it's about consequence. Rick lives as if consequences are fiction, distractions invented by weaker minds. But Morty has lived too long inside the aftermath of Rick's choices to believe that. He's seen the faces of people left behind. He's seen how destruction echoes. Responsibility, he realizes, isn't about predicting outcomes. It's about being willing to face them when they arrive. It's about owning the wake of your own existence, even when it hurts. There's a moment, one of those unremarkable ones that stays anyway, when Morty stops Rick from doing something reckless. Rick argues, insults him, demands logic, and Morty doesn't offer any. He just says quietly, "Because it's wrong." No equations, no philosophies, just that. And for the first time, Rick doesn't have a comeback. That silence between them feels heavier than all the adventures combined. Because in that moment, Morty isn't just following Rick's logic, he's defying it. He's taking responsibility for what Rick refuses to see, that morality doesn't need to be justified by outcome, it just needs to exist. The more responsibility Morty takes, the more he realizes how impossible it is to bear it perfectly. There's no right choice that fixes everything. Every decision costs something. To act is to harm someone, somewhere, somehow. Responsibility becomes a kind of mourning for all the paths that have to die so one can live. It would be easy to drown in that sorrow. Rick would say, "It's foolish to care about losses you can't measure." But Morty has stopped listening. He understands now that the weight of responsibility isn't meant to be escaped. It's meant to be carried, carefully, consciously, honestly. It changes how he moves through life. He stops trying to save everything. He starts trying to preserve meaning. The small gestures, cleaning up after the mess, apologizing even when it doesn't fix anything, holding compassion for people who don't deserve it, not because it's efficient, but because it's human. Because responsibility isn't about being right, it's about staying kind when it would be easier to be cruel. He also starts to recognize that responsibility extends inward. The hardest person to take care of is himself. For years, he's treated his body, his mind, his feelings like afterthoughts, tools for survival, not things worth nurturing. But awareness, without rest, becomes self-destruction. He learns that responsibility doesn't just mean caring for others. It means allowing yourself to heal. It means forgiving your own exhaustion. It means admitting that you're still learning how to live. Rick never learned that, and it's what broke him. Morty intends to learn it before it breaks him too. Sometimes he fails. Sometimes he lashes out, withdraws, stops trying. Sometimes the weight of awareness presses so hard against his chest that he wishes he could be ignorant again. But those moments always pass, because he's learned the pattern. Awareness, guilt, numbness, rebellion, responsibility, all of it cycling through him endlessly, refining him. The universe doesn't demand perfection. It just demands continuation. The act of trying becomes its own form of faith. There's something deeply spiritual in that realization. Morty, who never believed in gods or destiny, begins to understand why people need faith. Not in the supernatural, but in each other. In the idea that effort matters, that compassion matters, even when the scale of the universe says otherwise. Responsibility, he realizes, is a kind of devotion, not to a higher power, but to the fragile connections that make life bearable. It's a vow to keep participating, even when it hurts. Rick would call that naive. He'd say Morty's wasting his time trying to hold meaning together in a collapsing universe, but Morty's tired of measuring worth by outcome. Maybe failure is inevitable, but so is beauty. Maybe destruction is certain, but so is love. Responsibility doesn't mean preventing the end. It means honoring the time before it. It means standing in the middle of chaos and saying softly, "I'll take care of this while I'm here." He doesn't always succeed, but he shows up again and again. Not because he believes it changes the cosmos, but because it changes him. Each small act of care rebuilds a piece of his own faith in existence. Responsibility, he learns, isn't about holding the world together. It's about keeping yourself whole while the world falls apart. When he looks at Rick now, he doesn't see a monster or a mentor. He sees a man who refused to bear the weight of consequence, and therefore lost the ability to feel anything at all. Morty pities him, but he also understands him. Carrying responsibility hurts. It limits you. It slows you down, but it's the only thing that keeps you grounded. Without it, intelligence floats untethered. Awareness becomes cruelty. Power becomes despair. Responsibility, Morty decides, is the gravity of the soul. The force that keeps you from drifting too far from what makes you human. And even if no one else feels it, even if Rick laughs at him for it, Morty carries that weight with quiet pride. Because in a universe where everything falls apart, staying grounded is the bravest thing you can do. Love, for Morty, has always been both anchor and wound. It's the thing that keeps him tethered to humanity, and the thing that hurts him the most when the universe refuses to honor it. For someone like him, who feels too deeply in a world that rewards detachment, love becomes a paradox. It's his rebellion and his weakness, his reason to continue and the cause of his despair. Every time he loves, the universe answers with chaos. Every time he tries to hold on to it, it slips through his fingers like something that was never meant to be kept. At first, Morty loves the way children do, instinctively, without fear. His affection for his family, his loyalty to Rick, his naive crushes, all of it pure, uncomplicated, unguarded. But exposure changes everything. Once you've seen universes collapse, once you've buried versions of yourself, once you've learned that nothing lasts, even love begins to feel unstable. He starts to love cautiously, half trusting, half braced for loss. The innocence fades, replaced by a quiet dread that every connection he forms is already temporary. Rick doesn't make it easier. To Rick, love is a chemical malfunction, a distraction from genius, a design flaw in evolution. He mocks it, reduces it, tears it apart in front of Morty. But what Rick calls weakness, Morty starts to recognize as strength. Because if nothing means anything, then love, illogical, irrational, unscientific, is the only thing that does. It's the one feeling that refuses to obey entropy. Love breaks the rules. That's what makes it holy. Morty's first heartbreak isn't about romance, it's about recognition. It's realizing that love can't save people, that caring about someone doesn't guarantee they'll care back, or change, or even stay alive. He watches Rick destroy relationships, push people away, sabotage every chance at connection, and he understands too late that brilliance doesn't make you capable of love. If anything, it makes it harder. The smarter you are, the easier it becomes to explain love away. But Morty can't do that. His mind has expanded, but his heart refuses to shrink. Love begins to fracture him. Every time he reaches out, it hurts. Every time he lets someone in, they become part of the growing constellation of things he's lost. He tells himself it's not worth it, that maybe Rick is right, that caring only leads to suffering. But he can't live that way. Every time he tries to numb himself, something, a memory, a voice, a smile, pulls him back. Love keeps finding him, even when he hides. That's what makes it unbearable. That's what makes it beautiful. There's a moment when Morty realizes that love doesn't have to be safe to be worth it. It doesn't have to last to be real. Love isn't a guarantee. It's a choice you keep making, even when it hurts. It's the decision to open yourself to a world that keeps breaking you, knowing you'll do it again tomorrow. That realization changes him. He stops chasing permanence and starts cherishing presence. The brief, imperfect, human moments, the ones that end, are the only kind that matter. But love doesn't just give, it demands. It demands vulnerability in a life that has taught him to armor himself. It demands trust in a universe that offers none. Morty learns that love and control cannot coexist. You can't protect someone from loss without smothering them. You can't save everyone without losing yourself. Love forces him to confront his own limits, to admit that some things are beyond fixing, that some people don't want to be saved. That realization hurts worse than any cosmic horror, because it means that even the purest intentions can still end in ruin. And yet, even through heartbreak, Morty refuses to let love become bitterness. He's seen what happens when it does. He's seen it in Rick. When love curdles into cynicism, it becomes cruelty. It turns connection into control. Morty refuses that path. He learns to love without ownership, to care without demand. To love not because it guarantees happiness, but because it reminds him he's still capable of feeling. It's not about finding the right person. It's about preserving the right capacity. Over time, love becomes less of a desire and more of a philosophy. It's not something he seeks, it's something he embodies. Love becomes the language through which he moves through the universe, gentle, patient, persistent. He stops trying to define it or contain it. It just exists, quietly, in the way he listens, in the way he forgives, in the way he keeps showing up. Love, he realizes, isn't something you fall into. It's something you practice. That practice saves him. It gives him the strength to forgive Rick, to understand his mother, to be kind to people who don't deserve it. Love stops being a transaction and becomes endurance, the art of staying soft in a hard world. It's not clean, it's not romantic, and it's not fair. But it's honest. It's the only thing in Morty's life that remains uncorrupted by irony. Sometimes, when he's alone, he feels the fracture again. The ache of all the people he couldn't hold on to, the versions of himself who loved badly or not enough. The ache never goes away, but it becomes part of him, like scar tissue that strengthens what was once fragile. Love doesn't break him anymore, it reshapes him. It teaches him that connection isn't about merging with someone else. It's about understanding that you're never truly separate. Rick calls love a delusion. Morty calls it proof. Proof that even in a meaningless universe, the human heart still insists on reaching out. Proof that something inside us resists the pull of nothingness. Proof that we're not just accidents of biology. We're participants in something tender and inexplicable. Love, Morty realizes, is the universe's quiet contradiction. It shouldn't exist, but it does. And maybe that's the point. Maybe meaning isn't found in grand purpose or eternal truth. Maybe it's found in the brief moments when one soul looks at another and says, I see you, I choose you. Even here, even now, Morty still gets hurt. He still loses. But he no longer sees love as weakness. He sees it as survival. Because love, no matter how fleeting, is the one thing the void can't imitate. It's the one thing the universe can't take from you once you've felt it. It changes you permanently, irreversibly, and that change is its own form of immortality. So when Morty looks out at the infinite versions of himself, he doesn't wonder which one found happiness. He wonders which one kept loving, because that, he knows now, is the only version that really lived. Loss doesn't arrive in Morty's life with explosions or grand finales anymore. It comes quietly, in conversations that trail off, in routines that stop, in the empty space left where laughter used to live. There was a time when loss shattered him, tore holes through his understanding of the world. Now it doesn't break him, it hollows him. And inside that hollow space, something unexpected grows. Stillness. Not peace, not acceptance, but a calm awareness that loss isn't the end of love. It's the proof that it existed. For most of his life, Morty thought loss was something to be outrun. Every time the universe took something from him, he followed Rick into motion. Another adventure, another distraction, another universe to hide in. Movement became medicine. As long as you kept moving, you didn't have to feel the weight of what was gone. But motion, he learns, doesn't heal, it just delays. The pain doesn't fade in time, it waits. It follows you quietly until you finally stop long enough to notice it breathing beside you. When Morty finally stops running, loss catches up. It's not dramatic. It's a slow realization that all the versions of people he's met, all the worlds he's left behind, are gone in ways that can't be reversed. That his own past isn't just over, it's unreachable. He tries, for a while, to catalogue it, to make sense of who he's lost, to count the missing, but numbers don't comfort. Loss, he realizes, isn't measured in what's gone. It's measured in the silence that follows. There are days when he feels the shape of absence more vividly than the presence of anything around him. The chair that's empty, the space in a conversation where someone used to interrupt, the songs that sound different now, heavier. It hurts, but it's clean, a kind of pain that asks for nothing. He starts to understand that grief is not an emotion, but a geography. You don't get over it. You learn to live inside it. You map its contours, its quiet rivers, its sharp edges. Rick tells him to forget. You can't grieve infinity, he says. You'll never stop. But Morty doesn't want to stop. Forgetting feels like another kind of death, one he can't accept. The universe erases meaning quickly enough without his help. So he begins to treat memory as resistance. To remember is to defy oblivion. To grieve is to participate in love one last time. Loss teaches Morty the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable, the natural echo of caring. Suffering is what happens when you resist it. When you demand that things make sense or stay the same. Once he stops fighting the pain, it changes shape. It becomes gentler, more spacious. He learns to sit with it, to breathe with it. The stillness of loss isn't comfortable, but it's honest. It's where the noise of the world finally fades enough for truth to be heard. In that stillness, Morty begins to see loss differently. It's not absence, it's transformation. Nothing truly disappears, it just changes form. The people he's lost still exist in echoes, in habits, in lessons, in small reflexes he doesn't notice until they appear. Rick's words, Summer's stubbornness, his mother's sigh, they live through him now, unconsciously, like traces of light. The dead don't vanish. They redistribute. They become part of the atmosphere you carry. The hardest lesson is realizing that you can't protect others from their own losses. Love doesn't grant immunity. It means watching the people you care about break in their own ways and knowing you can't stop it. That helplessness once made Morty angry at Rick, at fate, at the universe itself, but now he sees it differently. Maybe loss isn't punishment. Maybe it's the thread that connects every living thing. Maybe the reason love matters is because loss makes it precious. There's a night when Morty sits alone, surrounded by silence so deep it feels alive. He thinks about all the worlds he's visited, all the versions of himself that didn't make it this far. He feels grief for them, not as tragedy, but as kinship. Their endings make his continuation meaningful. Every lost version of himself carved space for this one to exist. He whispers a quiet thank you to the dark, not to anyone in particular, but to everything that didn't survive. Because without loss, there would be no awareness. Without endings, there would be no tenderness. Over time, Morty stops trying to heal from loss. He starts learning from it. Loss teaches him patience, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind that sits quietly beside pain and lets it breathe. It teaches him humility, that no amount of knowledge can protect you from heartbreak. It teaches him gratitude, that every person, every laugh, every small act of kindness is temporary, and that transience is what makes it sacred. Rick sees him sitting still like that and doesn't understand. You're wasting time, he says. But Morty knows that stillness isn't wasting time, it's how time heals. In the quiet, he can feel life moving through him again. The ache becomes rhythm, the silence becomes prayer. Grief, he realizes, isn't something you escape, it's something you carry differently until it becomes part of your balance. Loss doesn't stop hurting. It never will. But Morty no longer needs it to. He's learned that pain and love are not opposites. They're continuations of each other. The depth of one measures the depth of the other. You don't lose love when someone's gone. You just lose the form it took. The feeling remains, reshaped, quieter, but still alive. And so he begins to treat loss not as emptiness, but as presence, the most honest kind of presence there is. Because in grief, there's no pretense left, no performance, just truth. Just love, stripped bare of hope or demand. It's the closest thing to purity Morty has ever known. When he looks up at the night sky, full of stars that died long before he was born, he feels comfort instead of despair. Those lights are gone, but they still reach him. That's what loss is. Light from something that's no longer here, still travelling through time, still warm when it touches you. And for the first time, Morty smiles at the vastness of it all, at how even death can't erase connection completely, how the universe, for all its indifference, keeps finding ways to let love linger. Loss, he realizes, is not the opposite of life. It's the quiet proof that life was real. The longer Morty lives, the less certain he becomes of who he actually is. Not because of confusion, but because of exposure. When you've seen infinite versions of yourself, braver, crueler, weaker, wiser, identity stops feeling like a fixed truth. It becomes a spectrum, a shifting reflection that changes depending on where you stand. Once, Morty thought of himself as one person, one story. Now, he's not sure there's a single him at all. Just fragments, overlapping, contradictory, endlessly rewriting each other. This realization doesn't scare him the way it used to. When he was younger, the idea of not being special terrified him. He wanted to believe that he was the Morty, the real one, the version that mattered. Rick's universe shattered that illusion early. Every Morty is real, and none of them are. Every life he could have lived is happening somewhere. It's humbling, but also freeing. Because once you accept that identity is infinite, you stop needing to defend it. You stop trying to prove yourself. You just start being. At first, Morty fights the multiplicity. He compares himself to the other versions, the ones who made better choices, the ones who didn't survive, the ones who became monsters. Each reflection feels like a judgment. Every version reminds him of what he could have been, what he's failed to be. He tries to draw lines, to separate himself. I wouldn't do that. I'm different. But deep down, he knows he's not. Every possible version of himself lives within him somewhere. The potential for kindness, cruelty, apathy, courage, all of it. He's not the best Morty or the worst. He's just the one who's still learning. That realization changes how he looks at everyone else. If identity is fluid, then so is morality. People aren't fixed in their flaws or virtues. They're conditions, shaped by moments, by pain, by proximity to love. Rick once told him that people are predictable when you understand their incentives. Morty disagrees. He's seen too many people surprise themselves to believe that. The human spirit is unpredictable precisely because identity isn't static. It moves. It evolves. It contradicts itself. And that's what makes it alive. He starts thinking of identity like a mirror maze, infinite reflections of the same light, each distorted by circumstance. Sometimes he hates what he sees in the reflections. Sometimes he pities it. But more often now, he feels compassion. Even the versions of himself who failed were still trying. Even the cruel ones thought they were surviving. Awareness transforms judgment into empathy. You stop asking, "Who am I?" and start asking, "Who am I right now?" That's a question you can live with. The mirror doesn't just show him other versions of himself, it shows him the parts he's ignored, the anger he hides behind reason, the pride he disguises as morality, the loneliness he covers with humor. Rick used to tell him that self-knowledge is the key to freedom, but Morty's learned that it's the key to humility. Knowing yourself doesn't make you powerful, it makes you honest. It strips away the illusions of purity and purpose and leaves you with something simpler, awareness without judgment. Sometimes he wonders if Rick ever looks in the mirror at all, if he ever sees the fragments of himself scattered across universes. Maybe that's why Rick builds machines, to drown out the noise of identity, to stay busy enough that he never has to face the emptiness of being one version among billions. Morty understands that now. The closer you get to total self-awareness, the harder it becomes to find peace. You realize that there's no true self waiting at the center, just shifting layers of experience, all equally real and equally temporary. For Morty, that realization is both devastating and liberating. It means he can stop waiting to become someone else. He doesn't need to reach some final version of himself to be worthy. There's no ultimate Morty, no perfect conclusion. Every moment, every choice, every contradiction, that's who he is. The mess is the meaning. The impermanence is the identity. He starts to see that identity isn't something you define, it's something you participate in. It's a dialogue between who you were, who you are, and who you're still becoming. When he looks back at the younger Morty, the one who trembled at every danger, who idolized Rick, who believed in simple right and wrong, he doesn't cringe anymore. He feels gratitude. That Morty got him here. That Morty was brave enough to care before he understood the cost. He's not gone. He's part of the foundation. There's something strangely spiritual in that realization. Morty has seen enough worlds to stop believing in souls, but identity feels like one. Not in a mystical sense, but as continuity, a thread of awareness that persists even when everything else changes. Every version of him that's ever lived adds to that thread. Every mistake, every act of love, every failure, every survival. The thread doesn't need to be eternal to matter. It just needs to be unbroken. Sometimes, Morty catches himself talking to those other versions of himself in his head, apologizing, thanking, forgiving. He imagines that somewhere they're doing the same for him. Maybe that's what self-acceptance really is. A conversation across realities. A truce between everything you could have been and everything you are. Identity, he realizes, isn't about choosing who you are. It's about acknowledging all the things you've been and still showing up as yourself anyway. It's about looking into the infinite mirror and saying, yes, that's all me. The good, the broken, the lost, the learning. And when you can say that without flinching, without turning away, that's when you become whole, even if only for a moment. Rick will never understand that kind of wholeness. He's too busy, trying to prove that nothing matters. But Morty doesn't need the universe to matter. He just needs to know that he does, that every version of him, every fragment, every reflection adds something to the whole. That's enough. So he stops looking for the true Morty and starts living as an honest one, the one who cares, who fails, who gets back up, who keeps learning how to exist, because maybe identity isn't about being singular. Maybe it's about being sincere. And in that sincerity, in the acceptance of all his contradictions, Morty finally stops searching for who he is. He just is. There comes a point in every life, if you're lucky, or cursed, or simply awake enough, where understanding stops being something you chase and becomes something that settles into you. Morty reaches that point not through brilliance or revelation, but through exhaustion. He's seen enough, lost enough, thought enough to realize that knowing everything won't save you. It won't even make you better. Understanding, he learns, isn't the reward for suffering. It's what remains after you stop demanding that life makes sense. When he was younger, Morty believed understanding was the goal, that if he could just figure it all out, the science, the morality, the chaos, then he'd finally feel at peace. Rick encouraged that illusion because he lives by it himself. But the truth is simpler and crueler. There's no final comprehension waiting at the end of all this. The universe isn't a puzzle you solve. It's a mystery you live inside. And the more you understand, the more you realize how much you never will. That used to terrify Morty. Now it comforts him, because it means he doesn't have to keep chasing. He can finally rest inside the question. Understanding, he discovers, is not an achievement, it's a posture. It's the way you face the world once you stop fighting it. It's the quiet recognition that everything, joy, pain, chaos, love, exists simultaneously and inseparably. It's knowing that contradiction isn't error, it's design. The universe isn't supposed to make sense, it's supposed to be experienced. Rick still argues with that idea. He can't stand ambiguity. To him, understanding means control. To Morty, it's the opposite. It's surrender. True understanding is realizing how small you are, how fragile, how temporary, and loving the world anyway. It's standing at the edge of infinity and saying, I don't get it, but I'm grateful to be here. Morty used to think knowledge was power. Now he sees its responsibility. Every insight you gain connects you to more of the world's pain. Every layer of awareness deepens your empathy. That's why Rick numbs himself, because true understanding hurts. It shatters the illusion of separateness. It makes you feel everything at once. Morty doesn't want to escape that anymore. He lets it wash through him. The beauty and the horror, the laughter and the silence. Understanding isn't clarity, it's compassion. It's not seeing things perfectly, it's seeing them and choosing to stay anyway. He notices how different the world looks now, not brighter or darker, just fuller. The same places, the same people, but with new gravity. The park bench isn't just wood, it's memory, design, decay. The air isn't empty, it's full of everything that's ever been breathed. Every sound, every movement, every heartbeat feels connected. Not in some mystical way, just real, simple interconnectedness. It's overwhelming sometimes, but it's also holy. Because, for the first time, Morty sees the universe not as a threat, but as participation. There's a quiet kind of wisdom in that shift. It's not about having answers, it's about being okay with not having them. The young Morty, who once begged for explanations, now just listens. He doesn't need certainty anymore. He's found something steadier. Curiosity, without desperation. Understanding, he realizes, is listening without needing to control what you hear. It's love without condition. He also understands Rick better now, not as a villain, not even as a tragic figure, but as a man caught in a feedback loop of brilliance and pain. For the first time, Morty sees his grandfather not as a force to resist, but as someone to forgive. Understanding doesn't mean excusing, it means seeing clearly enough to release resentment. He doesn't need Rick to change anymore. He just needs to understand why he can't. That forgiveness doesn't come from superiority. It comes from empathy, from seeing himself reflected in Rick's contradictions, from knowing that if life had bent slightly differently, he might have become just as broken. Understanding others, he learns, begins with understanding your own potential for harm. That awareness softens him. It makes him gentler with people, even when they fail him, especially when they fail him. The horizon of understanding widens slowly, like dawn. Morty doesn't even notice it happening at first. He just starts feeling less need to fix things, less urgency to prove himself, less anger when the universe disappoints him again. The stillness that used to feel like defeat now feels like grace. Understanding has taught him that peace isn't the absence of confusion, it's the acceptance of it. It's knowing that life's contradictions don't need resolution to be meaningful. Sometimes he sits outside at night, watching the stars with the same eyes that once looked at them with fear. They still stretch endlessly, still, burn indifferently, but he no longer feels small beneath them. He feels equal, part of the same pattern. He understands now that perspective isn't hierarchy, it's harmony. Every atom in him is also in them. The boundary between self and universe was never real. It was just something he needed until he was ready to let it go. Rick would call that sentiment. Morty calls it truth. The kind that can't be proven, only lived. The kind that doesn't make sense, but feels right. Understanding, he realizes, doesn't arrive as knowledge, it arrives as peace. And peace isn't static, it's the gentle rhythm between knowing and not knowing, between holding and releasing. He still struggles. He still doubts. But even doubt feels different now, quieter, softer, almost loving, because understanding isn't certainty, it's patience. It's looking at the infinite absurdity of life and whispering, okay, that's the horizon Morty has reached. Not the edge of knowledge, but the edge of need. The moment when you stop demanding meaning and start living it. The moment when you stop asking why and start asking how. How to love, how to care, how to keep existing in the face of everything that says you shouldn't. And as the horizon widens, Morty finally sees the truth Rick missed all along. That understanding isn't power over the universe, it's belonging to it. Freedom, Morty realizes, was never what he thought it was. When he was younger, it looked like escape from school, from his family, from Rick's chaos, from the weight of responsibility and the pull of expectation. He believed freedom meant distance. The further he could get from control, the closer he'd be to himself. But the older he grows, the more he sees how hollow that idea really was. Freedom isn't running away from what binds you. It's learning to live within it without losing yourself. Rick always talked about freedom like it was the highest truth. No gods, no masters, no meaning, no rules. He called it liberation. But Morty knows now it was a cage disguised as open space. The absence of connection doesn't make you free, it just makes you lonely. The absence of consequence doesn't make you limitless, it just makes you lost. Morty has seen where total freedom leads. It's not peace, it's isolation. It's Rick, brilliant, unbound, and completely alone. At some point, Morty stopped wanting that kind of freedom. He stopped mistaking emptiness for possibility. He learned that boundaries aren't prisons, they're anchors. They give shape to existence. To be free isn't to have infinite options, it's to choose deliberately with awareness. Real freedom isn't the ability to do anything, it's the strength to do the right thing even when you could do otherwise. It's a discipline, not an escape. He thinks about all the times Rick justified cruelty in the name of freedom, the times he said morality was a chain, that love was manipulation, that rules were lies. It used to sound profound. Now it just sounds sad. Freedom without empathy isn't liberation, it's detachment. It's the kind of emptiness that eats you slowly until you start mistaking your own isolation for enlightenment. Morty doesn't want that anymore. He wants to belong, not in a possessive way, but in a conscious one. To belong is not to be owned, it's to be connected. The paradox of freedom, he realizes, is that it only becomes meaningful when you limit it. Infinite possibility means nothing if nothing matters. It's the act of choosing, of closing off other paths, that gives life texture. Every decision you make defines the shape of who you are. Without those limitations, there's no self, no story, no growth. The universe might not impose purpose, but you can. Every boundary you draw becomes a kind of art, an outline that turns chaos into form. Morty starts to understand that freedom and love aren't opposites, they depend on each other. Love without freedom becomes control. Freedom without love becomes emptiness. The balance between them is fragile and human. To love someone is to give them freedom without abandoning them. To be free is to stay connected without surrendering yourself. It's a tension, not a solution. And it's the only kind of balance that lasts. There's a quiet night when Morty sits beside Rick, neither of them speaking. Rick's been drinking, lost somewhere inside his endless loops of regret and arrogance. The stars above them flicker like old memories. Morty doesn't try to save him anymore. He doesn't try to argue or fix or plead. He just sits. That too is a kind of freedom, choosing not to change what isn't ready to change, choosing to stay anyway. The space between them isn't comfort, but it isn't despair either. It's coexistence. It's understanding that you can't heal someone by taking their pain away. You can only stand with them while they learn to carry it. For the first time, Morty feels free, not because he's untethered, but because he's grounded. He's no longer at war with the world. He's learned that true freedom isn't about control, it's about trust. Trusting that life will continue even when you let go. Trusting that you don't need to win every argument or hold every thread together. Trusting that meaning doesn't disappear just because you stop clinging to it. He looks back on his younger self with compassion now. The boy who wanted to escape, who thought the goal was to be unbroken, untouched by the universe's chaos. He wasn't wrong to want that. He just didn't know that wholeness doesn't come from isolation. It comes from participation, from being part of something, even if that something hurts. Freedom isn't the end of suffering, it's the ability to face it without running. Rick's kind of freedom burns everything around it to stay alive. Morty's kind of freedom nourishes it. It's gentler, quieter, slower. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't shout, "Nothing matters," it whispers, "Everything does, but not forever." And that's okay. Freedom, he understands, is not the rejection of attachment, but the acceptance of impermanence. You can hold something without owning it. You can love someone without needing them to stay. You can live fully without needing it to last. There's peace in that. A peace Rick may never find. But Morty doesn't pity him anymore. He understands that everyone defines freedom differently. For Rick, it will always mean escape. For Morty, it's engagement. Freedom is not about leaving, it's about staying, and staying true. It's waking up every morning and choosing to be present, even when you could disappear. When he looks out across the stars now, he doesn't see infinity as something to conquer. He sees it as something to belong to. Every point of light is a version of the same story, trying, failing, caring, ending, beginning again. Freedom isn't found in rising above that pattern. It's found in participating in it consciously. So Morty stops chasing the version of himself that's untouchable, untethered, perfectly wise. He doesn't want to escape the cycle anymore. He wants to live inside it. Because freedom, in its truest form, isn't transcendence. It's return to the same truth, over and over, each time with a little more grace. He smiles at the paradox of it all. That surrender is the only real form of control. That stillness is the only way to move freely. That caring, the thing that hurt him most, is also what finally set him free. And as the stars fade into morning, Morty feels lighter. Not because the weight is gone, but because he's no longer fighting gravity. He's finally learned to fall and call it flight. There's a stillness that comes after every storm, not the silence of nothingness, but the deep, steady hum of continuation. That's where Morty finds himself now. After everything, the chaos, the heartbreak, the laughter, the lessons, the running, the falling, he's arrived at something beyond understanding. Not enlightenment, not peace, not closure, just being. Simple, quiet, unremarkable being. And somehow, that's everything he was looking for all along. He used to think existence demanded explanation, that if you weren't searching, you were wasting time. But the more he's lived, the more he's seen how life doesn't need justification. It just is. The universe doesn't ask to be understood, it asks to be experienced. Every joy, every sorrow, every act of love and cruelty, all of it part of the same rhythm, Morty's learned to stop separating it. To stop labeling everything as good or bad, success or failure, meaning or void. There's no division anymore, just movement. Just the endless breathing of life, expanding and contracting, like the universe itself. He's older now, though time means less to him than it used to. Rick's still somewhere out there, maybe still running, maybe still building, maybe finally resting. Morty doesn't need to know. The ache that used to come with that thought has softened into something else. Understanding doesn't always bring closeness, but it brings forgiveness. And forgiveness is its own kind of love. He carries Rick inside him now, not as a wound, but as a presence. The lessons, the scars, the laughter, the mistakes, all of it mixed together into something human. Rick taught him how to see the truth, but Morty taught himself how to live with it. That's their balance. That's their legacy. They've both changed each other in ways they'll never admit out loud, and that's okay. Some things don't need to be said to be real. There's a quiet beauty in that realization. That meaning doesn't need to be monumental to matter. That maybe the point was never to fix the universe or even understand it, but to live through it honestly, to feel everything it offered, even the unbearable parts, and keep loving anyway. That's what makes Morty different from Rick. Not his intelligence, not his morality, but his willingness to remain open, to stay soft, to let the universe hurt him and still say thank you. He sits outside often now. The sky is different, but it feels the same. There's always a horizon somewhere, always a light fading or returning. He listens to the wind, to the quiet hum of everything continuing. The air feels full, not of answers, but of presence. He doesn't feel small anymore. He doesn't feel special either, just connected. Every breath feels like participation in something endless. It's strange, the kind of peace that comes when you stop needing permanence. Morty has seen worlds end. He's seen love dissolve, families fracture, stars die. And yet every ending has carried a strange mercy, the promise of transformation. Nothing really disappears. It just changes form. Pain becomes memory. Love becomes echo. People become stories that someone else carries forward. Even Rick, for all his insistence that nothing lasts, has become part of Morty's own rhythm. His presence ripples quietly through every thought, every kindness, every bit of resilience Morty has learned to hold. That's what eternity really is, he realizes. Not infinite time, but infinite influence. The way moments pass through each other, never truly ending. The way laughter becomes dust, and dust becomes light, and light becomes memory again. You can't hold it, but you can feel it. You can join it. You can let it move through you. Morty used to dream about escaping the cycle, transcending, ascending, finding some version of existence that wasn't so heavy. But now he doesn't want to escape. The cycle itself is beautiful. The birth, the loss, the rebuilding, it's all part of one continuous gesture of becoming. Maybe peace isn't found outside the cycle, but within it. Maybe the goal was never transcendence, but participation, to be aware of the movement and still keep dancing. There's a memory he keeps returning to, sitting in silence beside Rick, staring out at the stars. At the time, it felt incomplete, like a moment that needed something said, something done. Now he sees it differently. That silence was the answer. Two people, infinitely different, yet bound by the same awareness, just existing. No arguments, no experiments, no justifications. Just being alive together. That's the closest thing to truth either of them ever found. Morty understands now that the universe was never cruel or kind. It was neutral. The cruelty and kindness came from them. from what they chose to project into it. Meaning wasn't hidden in the stars, it was made in their choices, their laughter, their pain. The universe doesn't care, but caring was always their way of shaping it. Awareness was never meant to be a burden. It was an invitation to notice, to participate, to create. He closes his eyes and feels the hum of existence. Steady, endless, quiet. He knows it will keep going long after him. And that doesn't make him sad. It makes him grateful. Because in the brief flicker of his life, he got to be aware of it. He got to love and lose and learn and forgive. He got to see infinity and still find beauty in a single moment. He got to care, even when it didn't make sense. And that, he thinks, is the purest form of living. Maybe Rick was right about one thing. Nothing truly matters on a cosmic scale. But Morty's learned that scale was never the point. Meaning isn't measured in size or permanence, it's measured in sincerity. In how deeply you feel, how honestly you exist, how willingly you connect. You don't need the universe to care, you just need to care within it. He sits until the sky begins, to lighten dawn, spreading gently across the quiet world. The air smells like renewal, like continuation. He smiles softly, not because he's figured anything out, but because he no longer needs to. Awareness has become comfort. Uncertainty has become home. He whispers to the rising light, "It's okay," not as surrender, but as truth, because it is okay. The chaos, the pain, the absurdity, the love, all of it, the universe hums back, and Morty breathes.